The world's most wanted man is dead nearly a decade after the attacks on September 11th. The stunning announcement from President Barack Obama is one of the most significant in American history.
Joining us now to give us a little more historical perspective is the chair of the history department at Alverno College, Professor John Savagian. Welcome, your first time on the show. We're glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
Is this, and this may be a very subjective question, is this a where were you moment, like 9/11 was, Man on the Moon, for example, Kennedy, or does it not reach that, or do we not know yet?
Well, you're going to take some time. I mean, I'm certainly going to remember it, and I think most Americans will. I don't think it's going to be a global issue as profound as, for example, President Kennedy's death, but I think people are going to remember this.
As a professor of history, where do you think it will rank? Because, again, it's one of those moments you remember where you were. We're coming off a very cynical time with the recession, et cetera. Do you think this will lift us and make this, is this a new start, I guess?
Well, it's very hard to predict, but it's going to be difficult for Americans to now center their anger, their desire for revenge. In a sense, I'm wondering if it's going to create a little more unmooring for people, because you've always had this evil figure that you could focus on, and when you saw enemies or threats, you saw Osama Bin Laden. So the question is, what are you going to look for now?
One of those little quirks of history that came out was that May 1st is when we learned also that Adolf Hitler dead in a bunker. May 1st, also the day we learned Osama Bin Laden. Shortly after Hitler's death, though, VE Day, Victory in Europe. There's a finite end to a period. There is no end point here, though, yet. Does that make it tougher to put this into an era?
I think so. It's also true that when we're talking about Germany, we're talking about a nation, and it's very difficult to identify a nation state here. There isn't any. Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda are so amorphous, and it's very difficult for people to get their minds around that. When you had an entire world going to war and you had a place that you could focus on, there isn't that place now, and there is now not even a leader. So it's not going to be that easy for people to get a grasp on what's the next step. That's where it's going to take President Obama and other leaders to really help Americans do that.
And if there's a chapter in a history book, perhaps, that you are authoring, what would it be if you could sum this up in a chapter? What happened last night?
Well, it was probably, for historians, it was probably 9 years too late. We probably would have thought this is something that should have been done a lot earlier, and it's going to take another reevaluation of what exactly is going to happen. Historians don't like to really think until 20 years later about what's really going to happen here.
Can we talk quickly for about 30 seconds on the celebrations we saw last night, impromptu celebrations at the White House and at sporting events, and we may see more tonight, although they won't be as spontaneous. Do they have a place in history?
Well, everyone remembers victory over Japan, victory over Germany, those enormous crowds in the cities. So I think that's something people are going to remember. There's also there's going to be a bit of a backlash, too, globally about some of the celebration. There's certainly closure for Americans, but it's also celebrating someone's death is not something that people tend to, remember as a great thing. They're more likely remembering the end of an era, as you suggested.
Right, we don't celebrate the day Hitler died, we celebrate VE Day more in that case. Okay, interesting point.
Dr. Savagian, thank you very much. Hope to have you back sometime. Thank you.
Crowds.